From secret troops you've never heard of to 1,000 IQ card placements, here are 100 Clash Royale tips, tricks, and secrets. When you see a hog rider coming towards your tower from the bridge, for most of us, our muscle memory kicks in and we just place our building in the middle to kite the hog as much as possible and buy time for our towers to take it out. Well, when you're using the goblin cage, this is actually the opposite of what you want to do. Placing the goblin cage in the middle will result in the hog rider outrunning the goblin brawler inside and getting a hit on your tower. To fully counter the hog, instead place the goblin cage directly in his path so that when it breaks, the brawler can get a couple hits in and save your tower from taking any damage. When using the miner for chip damage, most people think you can just place him wherever you like since he pretty much gets the same amount of hits in no matter what. While this does seem true at first, most placements of the miner can make it easy for your opponent to pull him to the king tower with their tornado for a free activation. So instead of placing him in the front or back of the tower, you want to place your miner at the far corner of the tower furthest from the opponent's king. This puts their crown tower in the way, stopping the tornado from being able to pull the miner far enough and leaving your opponent's king tower disabled just like you want it. One mistake I see players make all the time is mistiming their counter to an incoming flying machine. I've personally made this mistake more than once, and it's easy to do since your depth perception doesn't work as well with flying cards. Well, luckily there is a simple trick that will fix your timing and ensure that you never take tower damage to the flying machine again. Instead of looking at the flying machine itself, you'll want to pay attention to its shadow, which will tell you exactly which tile the machine is technically on. Then when that shadow crosses the bridge, you'll know it's the perfect time to place your tank or other counter so that your tower is in range to help take it out. Some players think using the Inferno Tower to defend against an Electro Giant wouldn't be a good idea since he just resets it with his electric aura. While this is true, there's actually a specific placement that makes the Electro Giant's path a bit longer, buying your Inferno Tower just enough time to heat up and take the E-Giant out without getting reset or damaged. So next time your opponent sends in an E-Giant, make sure to use the proper placement and give yourself a nice positive elixir trade. Another crucial placement tip is to place your spear goblins in what is called the bypass placement rather than right at the bridge when you're trying to get chip damage. This placement will actually buy the second spear goblin just enough time to get a second hit in, which at max level means an extra 119 chip damage to your opponent's crown tower. The only downside to this placement is that it does give your opponent just a bit more time to react to your goblins, so if you're playing against someone with lightning fast reflexes, maybe stick to the normal placement for that match. Another thing I see players ignore far too often is the fact that the spirit cards in Clash Royale have a health bar. I don't mean that they literally forgot the feature exists, but far too many players just place their spirits anywhere out of harm's way so they can jump onto their target and achieve the desired outcome. But you might be surprised to learn that any of the spirit cards can actually tank a hit from a bunch of different units before dying, even from something as strong as a musketeer. Running with that example, placing your spirit in such a way where it tanks a hit before jumping can save your tower or other troops from some decent damage and potentially win you a game in some scenarios, so remember this tip next time you're using one of the spirit cards. Some cards in Clash Royale were just built to be used together. Think of the Executioner and the Tornado, the Lumberjack and the Balloon, and so many more combos. But one combination I'm sure a lot of you haven't thought of is the Berserker and the Rune Giant. For those who don't know, the Rune Giant's enchantment grants the target troop a flat damage boost on every third hit. Because of this, it makes a lot more sense to use the Rune Giant with fast attacking troops like the Dark Goblin and Lumberjack since they attack more often and will therefore get a much better damage boost overall. This effect is perhaps the strongest with the Berserker since she attacks very fast, and we can tell these two were meant to be used together since they came out around the same time and they even have the same orange hair. So next time you're thinking about using the Rune Giant in a deck, make sure and put the Berserker in too for the best value. Another thing a lot of players struggle with is being patient when placing their rage spells. I'm sure all of us have had the misfortune of playing a match against an Elite Barb rage player, and more often than not, you'll see them drop their rage spell before even dropping the Elite Barbs at the bridge. This seems fine enough since they'll run into the rage eventually, but waiting 1 to 2 seconds after placing the Elite Barbs can not only buy your troops more time in the rage spell, but it also makes sure you don't miss out on taking out any potential counters like the Skeleton Army, Bats, or others. In this example, you can see how waiting to play the rage spell made an incredible difference in the outcome of the push. This technique can also be applied to most other spells in the game, as waiting a bit longer can almost always give you the opportunity to get extra value with your spell. The next mistake on our list is leaking elixir. For whatever reason, Clash Royale players are very stubborn about not wanting to be the player to make the first move in a match. This does make sense since if you aren't the first person to play a card, you get a second to react to what your opponent played and feel out their deck a bit more. That being said, I've seen people sit around and leak 2, 3, or even more elixir because they're planning their first move so long. This instantly puts you in a sizable elixir deficit, which can at best make the match a lot harder to win, but at worst it can result in you straight up losing the match entirely due to being behind on elixir. So if you really have to not be the first person to make a move, at least be ready to react very quickly to your opponent's first card so that you don't leak too much elixir and give them an easy win. Another tip that can make matches a lot easier to win in many scenarios is to use split lane pushes. This strategy is practically the whole reasoning behind Royal Hog's recruits decks, but it can be applied across many other deck archetypes as well if you really think about it. A split lane push is when you apply some form of pressure across both lanes instead of just building a massive massive push in one lane. While some players will have no trouble defending these types of pushes, a lot of times sending something small and quick in the opposite lane when your push is at the bridge can either cause your opponent to lose focus or just slip by entirely unnoticed and get you some really solid damage. So instead of always sticking to one lane, try to split cards in the back from time to time, or just split up your push altogether when it makes sense. The next mistake I see players making is only playing meta decks all the time and never being willing to switch things up. I have shared a similar tip to this in the past, but I'm talking from a completely different angle this time. What I'm getting at is that a fun and effective strategy can be to take an existing popular deck like say Logbait and switch out one of the less iconic cards in the deck for something completely different. This works because most players are used to classic decks and won't notice you haven't played the 8th card, which can sometimes give you the element of surprise and maybe even win you the match. The most popular example of this recently has been the sneaky golem trend, where players play a 2.6 hog deck but switch out the ice golem for an actual golem. The key to success with this strategy is to wait to play the switched out card until a pivotal moment in the match when your opponent is either overcommitted with a push or just isn't expecting it. This can be a super fun way to switch things up and confuse your opponents. Another mistake that a lot of players make is either ignoring or straight up not being aware of the card weight system in the game. For those who don't know, every card in Clash Royale has a weight. For example, the P.E.K.K.A. and Golem are very heavy cards that are hard to push or pull out of the way, whereas the Bomber is extremely light and can easily be tossed around by other troops and spells. This can be very useful to know when trying to defend an incoming push, but just remember that the log will push any card back no matter how heavy. When you have a bandit coming towards your tower, players usually do one of two things. Either they place their counter directly on top of the bandit, which can be fine depending on the counter, or they place it in the middle to try to get both towers involved in taking the bandit out. But in a lot of scenarios, it can be beneficial to place your counter in range of the bandit at just the right time so that she won't dash onto your counter or dash onto the tower after taking out your counter. Like I said, this doesn't apply to counters like the mini P.E.K.K.A. that'll just take her out either way, but with something like the skeletons, this can make a huge difference. We all remember how overpowered and ridiculous the evolved lumberjack was upon release, with players spamming rage spells to keep him alive forever in addition to him being invincible. While Supercell fixed this by causing the rage spell to no longer extend the lumberjack ghost's life, the rage spell will still keep the lumberjack ghost alive for the full 4 seconds if he were to leave the original rage spell. So if your lumberjack ghost ever tries to immediately leave the original rage spell, which it seems he does quite often, you can still drop another rage spell to make sure he gets his full 4-second lifespan and you get all the value out of his high damage output. The next mistake I see all the time is players spending all of their resources on one deck. While this can be effective in the short term by becoming over leveled and being able to win a lot of matches, once you get higher in trophies and other players have maxed cards too, you're now kind of stuck with that one deck and have no option to switch or make a new deck without being underleveled yourself. So what I would recommend is that you upgrade all your cards to a decent level, say level 12 or 13, before going crazy on your main deck. This will give you options and prevent you from becoming hard stuck at a certain trophy range. The mistake you might be making is not splitting your archers. The archers are a strong 3 elixir card that I personally enjoy using, especially when they're evolved, but they are often way too easy to counter with arrows or even log depending on the situation if you play them both on the same side. Instead, you can either place the archers in the very back middle of the arena to split them, or if you're already building up a push from the back on one side or both, feel free to split them closer to the bridge, which will force your opponent to counter both sides since the lone archer will get some damage if left unanswered. This strategy will allow you to avoid getting easily countered and it'll force your opponent to spend more elixir to defend your pushes. The next mistake is simply using the minion horde. Now don't get me wrong, I have nothing against minions and I actually think they're a strong card both on defense and offense. In fact, the minion horde does give you more minions for a cheaper cost per minion than a regular minions card. That extra value does come at a cost though, as your opponent can simply use the arrows or even fireball on your minion horde to take it out for a positive elixir trade. This is different from the regular minions where using arrows against them would be an even trade and using fireball against them would be a negative trade for your opponent. If you do decide to throw the horde into your deck, I'd recommend taking a page out of the last tips playbook and splitting them in the back to get more value and put pressure on both lanes. The next mistake I see people make all the time is ignoring the pushing mechanic in Clash Royale. If you don't already know, you can actually push slower troops like the P.E.K.K.A. to get them to the tower much faster by simply placing them at the bridge and then placing a faster card like a Hog Rider or some goblins behind them. You need to line this up correctly though, since if you put the Hog Rider off to the side even just one tile, he'll most likely just push past the P.E.K.K.A. and go to the tower on his own, most likely leaving your push ineffective. So especially if you already use the Hog Rider, goblins, or another fast moving ground troop in your deck, I'd recommend giving this strategy a try since you might just catch your opponent off guard and get an easy win. This next tip is simply sleeping on the skeletons. The skeletons are an amazing and versatile card that can fit into pretty much any deck archetype. Not only are they cheap at only 1 elixir, so they can help you cycle to your evolutions or win condition faster, but they can actually fully counter a lot of cards in the game, such as the mini P.E.K.K.A. along with several others. Any deck can benefit from using the skeletons since they can provide so much value for such a cheap price. Those of you who've played the game for a while might remember that the skeletons card actually used to contain 4 skeletons instead of 3, but this was way too overpowered, so Supercell nerfed them down to 3. But the card still remains very powerful to this day, so if you haven't given the skeletons a try yet, or if it's been a while since you've used them, go ahead and throw them in your deck and see what happens. The next mistake on our list is not going for King Tower activations. For those who don't know, your King Tower is activated when one of two things happens. Either one of your Princess Towers gets destroyed, or the King Tower takes damage in any way, whether it be by a troop or a spell. You can actually use this mechanic to your advantage to activate your own King Tower and make it harder for your opponent to break through since you have an extra cannon on defense. While there are some advanced strategies out there for activating your King Tower, I'm going to show you 3 simple ways you can do this in your next Clash Royale match. In the first scenario, we see an Electro Spirit coming towards your Princess Tower alone. As you know, the Electro Spirit will survive if it has full health and will be able to jump onto the Arena Tower. We can actually use the chain mechanic of the E-Spirit to our advantage here, as if we place a card right between our King Tower and our Princess Tower at the right time, the attack will chain onto our King Tower, activating it and making the match much harder for our opponent to win. In the second scenario, we see a lone Firecracker coming across the bridge towards our tower. This one's even easier, as all we have to do is place virtually any card on this tile, and the Firecracker's backsplash damage will activate our King Tower while saving our Princess Tower from damage at the same time. The last scenario is a great one to try out if you haven't already, and it's simply using the Fisherman to activate the King Tower. As you know, the Fisherman can pull cards towards him with his fishing hook, so if you have an incoming Hog Rider, Giant, or virtually any other high HP card, you can simply place your Fisherman around here and he'll pull the incoming troop onto your King Tower, which will not only activate it, but also cause the troop in question to take fire from all 3 towers at once, killing it quickly. You can mess around with the timing of the Fisherman placement depending on what card you're facing, but the Fisherman makes King Tower activation easy and fun. Just make sure you aren't on the other end of this interaction and don't let your Firecrackers and E-Spirits go out alone. Going with the theme of cards that pull other cards, the next mistake is not using the Tornado. Now I will admit, not every single deck in the game works well with a Tornado in it, but I would argue that most deck archetypes could benefit from having the Tornado included if you can make it work. The Tornado is one of the most versatile cards in the game, since not only can it help get King Tower activations, but it can be a huge help with getting a lot of value for your splash cards like the Wizard, Executioner, Bomber, or even Valkyrie. Not only that, but the Tornado can also line up shots for your Magic Archer or Firecracker to get a ton of damage on the tower. The Tornado can honestly be used in a million different ways, so if you haven't already given it a try, I would highly recommend it, especially if you have splash cards in your deck already. Next, we have ignoring split wall breakers. Whenever you play a game against a player who's using wall breakers, you'll usually see them split the wall breakers at some point. The reason they do this is so that you'll feel that it isn't worth it to defend them, and they hope you'll ignore them and let them keep chipping away at your tower. This chip damage can really add up though over the course of a match, so it's worth it to learn a few easy ways to counter the wall breakers when they're split. The best way in my opinion is to either place skeletons, archers, a musketeer, or even a building in the middle of your side of the arena so that the wall breakers get taken out before reaching your towers. This works well with some of the other tips on our list, since if you split archers to take out the wall breakers, you now have a free counter push that your opponent will have to defend too. Next, we have not using the Deck Explorer feature. If you're anything like me, you have a few favorite cards in the game that you like using whenever you can. For me, I love using the Evolved Knight and the Evolved Archers together. Sometimes it can be hard to make a deck from scratch though, so Supercell made a feature where you can add a couple of cards or even half a deck worth of cards and use the Explorer feature to show popular decks that include those cards. That way, if you don't want to play the same old boring meta deck from top ladder that you always play, you can use your favorite cards in a more sensible deck without having to create the deck yourself and figure out which cards work well together. So if you haven't given this feature a try, I'd say it's definitely worth trying out. Next, we have not using some type of bait. We've all heard of the classic log bait in Clash Royale, and most of us hate it. The reason why log bait is so hated is because the log bait player will purposely play a bunch of cards like the Princess and Goblin Gang to draw out your log, and then you won't have it when they use their Goblin Barrel, leading to a frustrating situation for you. Log bait doesn't have to be the only deck that does this though, as pretty much every spell in the game has multiple cards that it counters very well. So if you find yourself having trouble with a specific spell, for example Fireball with your deck, I'd recommend putting another card or two like the Flying Machine, Zappies, or Royal Hogs into the deck to trick your opponent into using their Fireball, allowing you to get a ton of value with your main card. Next, we have not keeping track of your opponent's elixir. Now don't get me wrong, you don't need to be a tryhard and physically keep a count in your head of the exact amount of elixir your opponent has at any given time, but it is smart to think about it in certain scenarios and use it to your advantage. For example, if your opponent plays a golem in the back of the arena, you know they're sitting on 2 elixir at most. If you also have a lot of elixir at that point, it'd be smart to push with a high pressure card like a Hog Rider or Elite Barbs in the opposite lane. Since you know they're low on elixir, they won't be able to support their push and also counter your push on the other side, so they'll end up having to choose one or the other, leading to you either getting a ton of damage with your push and maybe trading towers, or better yet, them abandoning their heavy push altogether to defend yours, leaving you with an easy cleanup on the other lane. The next tip is to not ignore the death damage from the Skeleton Barrel. Every time you see a Skeleton Barrel floating towards your tower, it's tempting to just wait for it to go down and then time your Log or Barbarian Barrel so it takes the skeletons out without them doing any damage. While this may seem like a good option, the Skeleton Barrel deals nearly 200 death damage at max level, so that damage can add up very quickly. A better way to deal with the Skeleton Barrel is to either distract it with another building like a Tesla, or to use a Musketeer, Archers, or similar similar to take it out before it's too close to your tower. Then if you still want to log the skeletons, you can do that and still have a good counter push while not taking any tower damage. The next mistake is playing your lightning or fireball too early. Most people think you should play a lightning or fireball as soon as your opponent gives you value by placing something like a musketeer in the back. While this is true, it's a lot better to wait until the troop is almost out of range of the spot where you can hit the tower and the troop with the same spell, because a lot of times your opponent will end up placing another troop like a wizard, Sparky, or anything really in that same radius, allowing you to get even more value for simply being a bit patient. This is especially satisfying with the lightning spell, as I can't tell you how many times I've waited until the last second to play my lightning and ended up catching an extra musketeer or wizard, in many cases winning me the whole match. The next mistake on our list is using Royal Giant without the Fisherman. The Royal Giant and the Fisherman are like bread and butter, they just go together so well. And there's a good reason for this. We talked a little bit about the Fisherman before, and while he can be powerful in many different decks, he is the strongest when used with the Royal Giant. Since the Royal Giant is very susceptible to being taken out by tank killers like the P.E.K.K.A. and Mini P.E.K.K.A., the Fisherman is very useful for grabbing those troops and pulling them away from the Royal Giant. You don't have a lot of time to do this before the Royal Giant dies, so you want to pay attention to your opponent's timing and try to predict their counter with your Fisherman. Just one good play like this can win you the entire match, since the Royal Giant does so much damage. That being said, take your own advice and switch up your timing and placement of the Fisherman as well, so that your opponent can't easily predict it and take it out. The Royal Giant is one of Clash Royale's most iconic cards, and in my opinion, it's one of the strongest win conditions in the game. But did you know that the Royal Giant evolution has a secret mechanic that makes it way more powerful? Not many people know that the Evolve Royal Giant's Cannonball actually does splash damage. This doesn't come into play in every single battle, since this most often makes a difference when some type of flying card is right above the building that the Royal Giant is shooting at, but when you can pull this off, it definitely gets the Royal Giant just that much extra value. Speaking of evolutions, when the Ice Spirit got an Evo of its own, it actually used to take 3 cycles, meaning you'd have to place the Ice Spirit 3 times during the match, and only on the 4th time would the card actually be evolved. This made it nearly impossible to even play the evolution once during a match unless your deck was extremely cheap and you could forget about playing it multiple times in a match. For this reason, Supercell quickly stepped in and changed it to 2 cycles, which fixed the issue and made players happy again. Did you know that there are only 5 cards in the entire game that are able to take themselves out with just 1 shot? Before I tell you which 5 they are, pause the video and go ahead and comment your guesses down below to lock in your answer. Okay, now that you've made your guesses, the 5 cards are the Bats, Skeletons, Firecracker, Hunter, and Wall Breakers. I'll be impressed if anyone got them all right. We all know that Supercell's had their fair share of mishaps where they've unintentionally left something in the game or caused a bug that they later had to go and fix. But did you know that Supercell actually put the Skeleton Barrel into Clash Royale by accident before it was supposed to be released? Yeah, you heard that right. On October 17th of 2017, the card was available to play inside of the Mirror Challenge, even though the card wasn't actually supposed to come out for another week. Supercell did notice this fairly quickly, and they were able to fix it with an emergency maintenance break. Some of you might remember that when the Goblin Gang first came out, it actually used to only have 5 goblins in total. Nowadays, there are obviously 3 Spear Goblins and 3 Stab Goblins for a total of 6, but the card render in the game actually still only shows 5 goblins to this very day. Do you ever wonder who the voice actors are for different cards in the game? Well, to save money, Supercell actually has some of their voice actors do the voices for multiple cards in the game. For example, the Knight, Barbarian, Electro Wizard, and Lumberjack are all voiced by the same voice actor, John Mondelli. Don't believe me? Check it out.
Hey, my name is John Mondelli, and I'm one of the voice actors in the game Clash Royale.
Snap! Electrify! Timber! Chop, chop!
Speaking of the Barbarians, did you know that the Elite Barbs make the exact same sounds as the normal Barbarians, just slowed down? This one's a fun one to test out for yourself in-game. If you hit the Barbarians with a Snowball or Ice Wizard, they'll become slowed down and they'll actually make the exact same sounds as an Elite Barbarian. If you want to give this a try the other way around, go ahead and throw a Rage spell on your Elite Barbarians, which speeds up their sounds, causing them to match the sounds of the normal Barbarians. Any of you Clash of Clans players out there may have noticed the game has a few references to Clash Royale hidden around. For example, there's the Clash Royale scenery that shows an arena complete with rockets in the bottom right of the screen when you're using it. Did you know that one of the special decorations from a few years ago in Clash of Clans featured the head of a skeleton dragon? I personally don't have this obstacle, but let me know in the comments if any of you guys do. The Rascals card was originally supposed to be just a knight with 2 archers behind it, kind of like how the Goblin Gang is 2 different troops in one. But Supercell ended up making the Rascals instead, which have very similar stats to a knight and 2 archers. That way they could balance the knight and archers separately without affecting this card too. We all know there are 4 different spirits in the game: Fire, Ice, Electro, and Heal. But did you know that one of these spirit cards actually doesn't have a mouth? That's right, if you've ever looked closely at the card art for each spirit, the Fire Spirit is the only one that doesn't have a mouth. Speaking of spirits, this next fact applies to all 4 of them inside the game. Whenever a spirit jumps, it instantly becomes considered a projectile while it's in the air, and it's no longer considered a troop in the game's code. We can see proof of this by looking at the touchdown game mode, where we can see that if a spirit jumps into the end zone, it won't actually score a touchdown. And that's pretty much the only useful situation to know this fact in, but hey, it's a pretty cool fact to know either way. Like other swarm cards in the game, the minion horde is actually cheaper than just playing 2 sets of normal minions, since that would cost 6 elixir and the horde only actually costs 5. You may think that this means to always go with the swarm version since it's cheaper per troop, but you actually want to be careful, as the other side of that coin is that your opponent can get way more value from their spells like the arrows and fireball, so maybe try splitting up your minion horde next time you use it. The Dark Prince actually used to be a royal recruit. Yup, if you look at the description for the royal recruits, it says that they dream of ponies and one day wearing metal buckets. It's quite obvious that this is referring to the Dark Prince, since that's the only card in the game that actually fits that description, so we can safely assume that each royal recruit actually has the chance to get promoted one day into a Dark Prince. When you upgrade the spear goblins to star level 3, you can see that they get a cool red mohawk. But did you know that this is actually a reference to Clash of Clans? That's right, when you upgrade your goblins to level 6 in Clash of Clans, they get the exact same mohawk as well. This next one's another that you observant players might have noticed before. If you look at the card render art for the minions, you'll see that their eyes are actually purple. Well, when you play the minions in game, you can see that their eyes are actually flaming red. Not only that, but the wiki suggests that the minions' eyes actually used to be team colored, meaning blue if they were your own minions and red if they were your opponents. Whenever a knight goes down in Clash Royale, I'm sure you've noticed that he drops his sword, which sticks into the ground and stays there for some time. But did you know that there are actually a total of 10 different cards in the game that do this? Beyond just the knight, you can also see the Rascal Boy, Mega Minion, Dark Prince, Executioner, Mega Knight, Sparky, Fisherman, Golden Knight, and Little Prince all drop their weapons upon being defeated. This is purely a visual thing, as the weapons can't actually be picked up and used later, but hey, it's still cool to know nonetheless. Something really strange about the giants in Clash Royale is that while the Royal Giant appears to be wearing some chainmail armor, he actually has less hit points overall than the normal giant. This doesn't make a lot of sense for obvious reasons, but maybe the giant just has some superpowers we don't know about, or maybe he's even wearing a bulletproof vest underneath that shirt. This at least makes sense from a balancing point of view, since the Royal Giant is only 1 extra elixir and has a range attack, so he probably would be a little broken if he had the same health as the giant. The skeletons are one of the least often cards to appear in balance changes. This is because the skeletons appear in a whopping 6 different cards in the game, being the Skeletons, Witch, Graveyard, Skeleton Barrel, Tombstone, and Skeleton King. If Supercell ever did decide to throw Larry into the balance changes again, it would surely be a nightmare for the other cards involved, since they would all get changed too. Speaking of balance changes, do you know that there's only one permanent card in the entire game that has never been included in a balance change update? This card is the Electro Spirit. Supercell obviously did an amazing job choosing the stats and cost for this card, since it's been strong but never overpowered ever since it got released in game. The Traitor is a concept that exists in both Clash of Clans and Clash Royale, but did you know that he's actually the exact same character in both games? That's right, if you look at the Traitor in Clash of Clans on the top left side of your base, and then look at the Traitor in the Clan tab in Clash Royale, you'll see that he looks the exact same in both games. The Sparky and the Firecracker are the only 2 cards in the game that have recoil when using their main attack. This doesn't mean a lot for the Sparky since it's heavier and attacks much slower, but for the Firecracker, as I'm sure we're all painfully aware of at this point, it can very easily cause her to avoid your arrows or whatever other spell you're firing her way. When the skeletons were first released in game, some of you veterans out there might remember that the card actually used to spawn 4 skeletons. Nowadays it only spawns 3, but I'm sure you can imagine how powerful the card was with 4, since it's still very powerful today if used properly. I swear the skeletons could nearly fully counter a P.E.K.K.A. on their own back in the day. That extra skeleton really made a difference. If you ever stopped to look a little bit closer at the archers in Clash Royale, you might have noticed that they have a quiver on their back. This makes sense since they need extra arrows to fire while they're alive in game. But did you know that the archers don't actually even reach back to grab the arrows from the quiver when firing? Yeah, the next arrow just magically appears in their hand after every shot. Again, maybe the archer just has some magical powers that are beyond our understanding or something. The bomber in Clash Royale was very likely inspired by the wall breakers from Clash of Clans. Funnily enough, the bomber then ended up getting added to Clash of Clans in the builder base update, and then Supercell added actual wall breakers to Clash Royale. This means that 2 troops were pretty much created out of nothing, but I don't think anyone's complaining. If you go to statsroyale.com and type in your player tag, you'll be able to see the next few chests in your cycle, as well as how close you are to getting big chests like the Royal Wild chest and the Mega Lightning chest. This is very useful to get an idea of where you are in your chest cycle and see if you're close to getting a good one. Not only that, but you can also see a lot of other information about your profile, such as your total donations, wins, and more. So click the link in the description or go to statsroyale.com after you finish the video to check out your profile. The Clash Royale arena may look symmetrical, but it's actually not. You see, due to small differences in the arena depending on which side you're on, some troop interactions can be different from game to game. When you get matched up for a game in Clash Royale, you're either assigned to true red or true blue depending on what side of the arena you're on. This is unfortunately random and there's no way you can choose for yourself. A good example of the differences this causes is when you use your goblin drill, as the drill will land in a different spot depending on which color you are. This is a very small difference that most players won't notice, but it is a crazy detail that I'm surprised the devs haven't patched yet. There are so many banners and badges badges in Clash Royale nowadays, but did you know that there's actually a secret banner that almost nobody actually has? During the release of the Book of Clash series in 2023, Supercell made a secret link that you could follow to claim a banner featuring the Hog Rider and Super Hog Rider from the book series. This exclusive offer didn't last long, and many players didn't find out about it until it was too late. So if you see someone out there with this banner when playing, make sure to send them a cool emote to pay your respects. Every card in Clash Royale can be played across any game mode of your choice, or at least that's what you probably think, but you've been lied to. The Baby Goblin's Tower Troop is actually the only card in the entire game that can only be played in one game mode, which is the Goblin Queen's Journey. Even the other Goblin cards that came out with the Goblin Queen's Journey, such as the Goblin Demolisher, have since been allowed to be used in ladder games, Trophy Road, and even challenges, but the Baby Goblins are still banned. Most people think the Monk card can reflect any projectile in the game. Well, that's not actually true. The Ice Spirit, Fire Spirit, Heal Spirit, and Electro Spirit are all technically actually considered projectiles in the game's code once they've jumped to perform their attack. While that is true, the Monk will not reflect them if they jump at him during his ability. If Supercell treated the spirits like other spells, you'd expect them to be shot back to the opponent's tower in this case. This doesn't happen though, which is unfortunate because it would be funny to see some cursed interactions like a Heal Spirit healing a tower if this actually worked. We all know that scrolling up on the Path of Legends will bring us to the leaderboard section at the very top, which shows the top 3 players in the game at a given time. But if you've ever scrolled up even further, you may have noticed a sneaky little goblin hiding in the top right corner. It takes a little bit of practice to do this since your phone will automatically snap down to the next screen if you let go, but give it a try next time you're playing. And hey, speaking of that goblin, he actually told me he wants you to subscribe to the channel, so maybe consider doing that. There is no Book of Champions in the game. There is a book for every other rarity in the game, including commons, rares, epics, and legendaries. So why isn't there a Book of Champions? Well, there is one book in the game that can be used to upgrade your champions, and that's the Book of Books, which used to be available every single month in the past Royale for only $4.99 a couple years back. Unfortunately, this book can now only be obtained from lucky drops with an extremely rare chance of that happening, or by spending real money in the shops when it's available. So if you ever get one of these books, make sure and hold on to it, and don't you dare waste it on a different rarity unless your champions are already maxed out. The Tombstone and the Furnace were both inspired by obstacles from Clash of Clans. We'd like to think the devs spend a lot of time brainstorming and coming up with brand new ideas for all the cards in Clash Royale. And while they usually do, sometimes they simply just copy and paste from another Supercell game. For example, the Halloween Headstone from 2014 in Clash of Clans looks eerily similar to the Tombstone, which was one of the first cards added to Clash Royale back in 2017. The devs actually got the idea for the Furnace in the exact same way, as there used to be a Clash of Clans obstacle for Halloween of 2015 that looked like a cauldron with purple liquid inside. That might just sound familiar because this design ended up being copied over and changed a little bit to create the Furnace that we all know and love today. I wonder if the devs will do this with any other obstacles in the future. Almost every single troop card in Clash Royale has its very own emote. Some of them have multiple, and even the evolutions get a few emotes of their own each month as they're released. That being said, there isn't a single spell card in the game today that has its own emote. At least that used to be the case until a few months ago when Supercell added the Evolve Zap to the game, which came with this exclusive emote that you see on screen now, showing the spell being used on the king. Because of this, Supercell will likely add emotes for the other spells too once they get evolutions of their own. We all know it can be easy to activate your king tower by placing a card in the middle against your opponent's firecracker, since the backsplash damage will end up hitting your king. But what most people don't realize is that interactions like this are way easier to pull off in the 2v2 game mode, as the firecracker, for example, will activate your king tower all on its own by simply shooting at one of your towers, since everything's more scrunched together. So next time you see a firecracker come across the bridge in a 2v2 match, make sure to ignore it and just hope and pray that your opponent ignores it too so you can get that free activation. Speaking of other game modes, I can't be the only one that gets mad at the Goblin referee in the touchdown game mode. His whistle can be annoying, especially when your opponent barely scored a touchdown on you the round before, so if you've ever wanted to take him out, you're not alone. Well, you'll be happy to find out that you can take him out. The timing isn't always easy, but with some practice, you can actually hit him with a spell as he's running off the field and he will go down. Kind of a waste of elixir if you ask me, but sometimes you just have to do it. When star levels were first released in Clash Royale, players soon noticed that a lot of the golden skins were references to different building and troop levels in Clash of Clans. For example, once you unlock the second star level on your Inferno Tower, it gains these spikes on the side, which look just like the level 3 Inferno Tower in Clash of Clans. Another example of this is the second star level for the hidden Tesla, which features the signature golden coil from the level 6 Tesla in Clash of Clans. These aren't the only examples though, as we see a similar story with the minions, goblins, and others. Clash Royale has several hidden Easter eggs in it that reference another Supercell game called Brawl Stars. The most obvious ones come from Electro Valley, which is the 11th arena on Trophy Road. This arena's scenery features a cactus that is a reference to Spike from Brawl Stars, as well as the Brawl Stars logo and a small star on the bottom right corner. The references don't stop there though, as there is a message that you can actually sometimes get on the loading screen which says that there are tales of a mechanical tackle wizard from a distant land. This message is a reference to Wizard Barley, another character from Brawl Stars. Brawl Stars isn't the only game that's referenced in Clash Royale though, as the Barbarian Bowl arena is pretty much completely pulled from Clash of Clans. As you can see, the obstacles, decorations, barracks, and pretty much everything else is directly copied over from Clash of Clans, which makes sense since most of the cards in the game are also based on Clash of Clans troops since the game came out first. The lucky drops were recently reworked to include 4 different types, with 1 star being a common drop, 2 stars for rare, 3 stars for epic, and 4 for legendary. But in extremely rare cases, the drop can be upgraded to have a 5th star, which is a champion drop, giving you extremely valuable rewards. I've only seen one of these so far, even though I open several drops every single day, and it actually ended up giving me a book of books, which is equivalent to $20 of real money. With how crowded the shop tab has gotten over the years, it can be annoying to scroll all the way to the bottom to get free rewards or enter a creator code. Lucky for you, if you tap the shop icon again, it'll cycle between the different sections of the shop, allowing you to navigate to the item you're looking for in a matter of seconds. Where's this tip been all my life? Clash Royale used to have a hidden feature that you could only see while editing your deck in Trophy Road. This feature would allow you to generate new decks using a few cards of your choice as a base. This feature was awesome for finding out new and exciting decks to try out, but unfortunately Supercell decided to remove this feature only a couple of weeks ago. The heal spell was a simple rare card back in the day, letting you drop a circle on the arena and restore health to your troops within that circle, just like the spell from Clash of Clans. But in 2020, Supercell decided it wasn't fun or useful enough as a spell, so they completely reworked it into the Heal Spirit, a troop that jumps into enemies, deals damage, and then heals friendly units nearby. It's one of the few times a card has been fully removed and replaced with something new, but a lot of players actually really loved the change, since the Heal Spirit is considered to require more skill to use successfully than the Heal spell, while also being more powerful when used correctly. If you've been playing Clash Royale for a while, you might remember that your crown towers used to be defended by basic archers. That all changed when the Tower Princess was introduced, replacing the archer entirely and giving towers a new look and a stronger defensive identity. This was one of the biggest cosmetic changes to the core gameplay everyone sees every match, and it opened the door for Supercell to add even more tower troops later, like the Cannoneer and Royal Chef. The Furnace has gone through plenty of balance changes over the years, but nothing as big as when it was recently reworked into a troop instead of just a building. Instead of sitting passively in one spot like the Goblin Hut, the Furnace became a moving card with troop stats, making it feel like an entirely new unit rather than the old spawner. To make things even more exciting, the Furnace was also given its own evolution the same season, but players weren't very impressed by this since all it does is spawn fire spirits faster than the normal version as far as we can tell, so that wasn't the best. While many players disliked the change and want the old Furnace back, many others were happy to see the old Furnace removed and think it's more versatile and fun to use in its new troop form. Ever since Clash Royale was released in 2016, players asked Supercell to add clan wars like how Clash of Clans had them. Supercell eventually did this and players were very happy to say the least. But the system was eventually removed and replaced with Clan Wars 2, which completely changed how Clan Wars worked. Instead of boat battles and the old system of card collection, the rework created new mechanics, progression rules, and rewards, redefining how clan competition worked for years. To be honest, most people don't like the new Clan Wars, and I personally don't really ever attack in war, as I don't find it very fun or rewarding. But hey, maybe they'll make Clan Wars 3 and it'll be better. Another feature that has undergone many changes over the years is the Season Shop. To be more precise, Supercell has never seemed to be able to decide on a set system for in-game currency in the game, with them adding and sometimes removing things like star points, season tokens, banner tokens, wild cards, elite wild cards, and more. Every time the current Clash Royale economy system gets too confusing, Supercell ends up reworking or changing things to try and simplify it, but it seems like only a matter of time until they just uproot it all and start with something fresh again. One big example of this was when the Season Shop was added in 2023, which replaced older systems of obtaining rewards with a rotating shop that refreshed each season, giving players more flexibility in how they spend their tokens. It turned seasonal rewards into something customizable instead of fixed, and a lot of players liked it, aside from the seemingly unnecessary addition of a new currency called season tokens that weren't super easy to understand for some. All that being said, the Season Shop only lasted for about 2 years before being removed just a couple of months ago. The Deck Builder tool was a feature that allowed players to more easily test, copy, and build decks. Specifically, the Deck Builder tool allowed players to add one or more cards to a deck, and then click on this icon in the deck tab, which would then show popular decks using that card or cards. This feature was super useful, but I guess Supercell decided not enough people used it since they ended up quietly deleting it in 2024. This left many players wishing it would return, since it was one of the more helpful tools for experimenting with strategies, but it doesn't look like we'll ever be getting that feature back at the moment. At launch, the Skeletons card spawned 4 skeletons for 1 elixir. This made Larry one of the most popular cards in the game, since the 4 skeletons provided a ton of distracting and cycling value all in one card. Over time though, Supercell realized that they should probably remove one of the skeletons to keep the card more balanced, and so that's what they eventually did in 2017, less than a year after the game's release. Interestingly enough, when the evolved skeleton skeletons came out in 2023, the 4th Larry was back, and this helped make the evolution a bit stronger than it would have been with 3. But as with all good things in this game apparently, Supercell removed the 4th skeleton nearly a year ago, leaving both the normal and evolved skeletons at only 3 units. The cannon cart was added to the game with a shield mechanic like the Dark Prince, where once the shield was broken, it would transform into a stationary cannon. This was reworked years later into a single health pool, meaning it no longer functioned like a two-phase card. This seems like a pretty pointless change at first, but it means that the cannon cart will now be completely destroyed by cards like the rocket, rather than having the shield soak up the hit and then still living on as a building. This change actually drastically altered the way that players have both used and countered the card ever since. Profile pages within Clash Royale were always kind of an eyesore since the game's release in 2016. There was really no customizability, no clear design, and a lack of any distinction or flashy visuals. That all changed in 2023 when Supercell completely overhauled how you show off your account by adding badges, banners, and other profile revamps to the game, replacing the old bare-bones profile page with something much more customizable and unique. This change gave players new ways to flex achievements, card preferences, personality, and more, and overall made the game look and feel much better to play. Something newer players may not realize is that we didn't always have these high-quality card renders on the card information screens. The card info screens used to just display the basic stats, a short description of the card, and an image of the card itself, not the troop or spell that it represented. That all changed when in April of 2022, Supercell added the first batch of these polished 3D renders of each troop or spell to the card info screens. When Supercell updated them to feature card renders, it completely changed how players saw the details of each card, making the collection feel much more alive and helping the game to feel more premium and well-crafted in general. The Path of Legends was introduced in 2022 as a competitive ladder separate from Trophy Road, but this feature is actually one of those that has been added, adjusted, and even removed at different times throughout the game's history. The feature was overall pretty good and functioned as it should have, with there being many different ranks to reach within the ladder, and after achieving the top rank, players could simply push for the highest possible trophies they could achieve. For whatever reason though, Supercell decided a few months ago to remove this feature altogether without warning and replace this system by just adding more arenas to Trophy Road and adding a ranked system that only unlocks each season after reaching 15,000 trophies. Let me know in the comments if you like this system better or if they should have kept Path of Legends in the game. The mirror card has always been a unique and often fun card to use in the game, but for a short time it was actually overpowered in a very strange way. Instead of leveling up a card by 1 level, Supercell made a change a few years back to where the mirror would actually upgrade your card's level by 2. This meant that max level cards, level 14 at the time, would be played as level 16 with the mirror, or for context, the equivalent of a level 17 card today. This was a lot of fun, but as you can imagine, those super high level cards were maybe just a bit too powerful. As a result, the mirror was eventually nerfed back to just 1 level, but for a brief period, mirror created some seriously crazy interactions in games. Originally, each rarity in the game had different maximum levels, with all rarities starting at level 1 and the higher rarities maxing out at lower and lower levels as you went up in rarity. This was confusing for players since it wasn't very intuitive to compare card levels across rarities and judge how good or impressive a certain card level was. As a result, Supercell reworked the entire system so that level 13 became the max for all cards at the time, no matter the rarity. This was a welcome change as it made it more clear that higher rarity cards were unlocked at a point where they were already viable to use in games instead of at the weak state of a level 1 common card. This change overall simplified progression and made the game feel more consistent as a whole. Another big change in Clash Royale was the removal of the trophy reset above 5,000 trophies. In the past, at the end of each season, you would lose a portion of your trophies if you were above 5,000 when the season finished. Players didn't like this because it felt like there was no long-term progress in the game and you would always just be reset after pushing all season. When Supercell got rid of this feature, high-level players could finally push their records without worrying about losing so much progress each month, which helped the game out a lot. Interestingly, with the re-addition of trophy resets in the last month or two, this same problem has sort of been reintroduced. Another crazy and impactful change was when Supercell made the Rage spell deal damage in 2024. The Rage spell used to simply increase troop speed, attack speed, and damage, but now the spell would actually do damage itself, killing very weak troops like skeletons instantly. This change was especially crazy since it affected the Lumberjack's Rage too, effectively granting him a major buff since he could now kill or damage nearby troops on death with no real downside. To make things even crazier, when the evolved Lumberjack was added last year, there was an oversight where the Lumberjack Ghost could survive in any Rage spell, not just the Lumberjack's Rage. So as you can imagine, players quickly rushed to build ultra cheap cycle decks so that they could just get a Lumberjack Ghost on the screen and then keep him alive indefinitely by spamming Rage and mirrored Rage spells on top. This strategy was impossible to defend and led to some funny, albeit frustrating games. Luckily, this has since been fixed and all is now right with the world. In honor of the Goblin Drill Evolution, the first mistake you might be making is playing your Goblin Barrel or Goblin Drill in the same spot every time. If your opponent is even a little bit serious about winning, they'll likely notice you placing your Goblin Barrel right in the center of the Princess Tower every single time, and they'll be able to take it out with their log, barb barrel, arrows, or whatever else they have with no problem at all. Instead, you'll want to switch up your placements by putting the drill or barrel on different sides of the tower or even further behind the tower to try and catch your opponent off guard and actually get some damage in with your win condition. So if you aren't already doing this, go ahead and give it a try next time you use a Goblin Barrel. This next mistake is way too common, and I'm even guilty of doing this myself sometimes. This mistake is rushing out to buy the Diamond Pass every season when the new evolution comes out. I know it seems tempting to play the newest card in the game, especially since most of them are a bit OP upon release, but you might want to save your money for future evolutions or other offers since most of these evolutions end up getting nerfed within a few weeks anyway. On top of that, Supercell has recently been starting to give away some of the older card evolutions for free through special events and things like that, so if you're just a little patient, you could end up getting to play the evolution anyway. So next time you feel those $12 burning a hole in your pocket at the beginning of the month, maybe think twice about splurging and buying the Diamond Pass. This next one's for you Expo and Mortar players out there. It's very common to see players playing their Expo or Mortar in the center of the arena on their side of the river, but this is usually not a good idea. Most of the time when you do this, you're just giving your opponent even more space to play cards in where they can tank for your Mortar or Expo. Instead of playing your Siege card in the middle, try playing it to one side or the other, one tile back from the river to give yourself some breathing room to defend your Siege card and hopefully prevent the opponent from defending it. One exception to this rule is if your opponent is playing some type of tank card like a Giant or Golem, it can sometimes make sense to go ahead and place your Mortar in the middle to pull the tank and also get a shot or two on the opponent's tower at the same time. Keep in mind though, this only applies to the Mortar since it has a dead zone, so don't go trying this with your Expo. This next mistake is simply playing Mega Knight. I know it may seem tempting and all your friends might be frothing at the mouth saying it's the way to go, but just trust me, it's not as good as you think it is. The next mistake is not pairing your deck to the tower troop you're using. I've personally won more games than I can count just because my opponent decided to use the Cannoneer as their tower troop, but also decided to not include any splash cards of any kind in their deck. The Cannoneer's main weakness is swarms like the Skeleton Army, so if you decide to use that tower troop, you really want to bring a Valkyrie, Bomber, or some other splash card to go ahead and defend against the swarms. This tip honestly mostly applies to the Cannoneer since the Dagger Duchess and Princess Tower both do good against swarms and tanks in my opinion, but it's still a good idea to think about your tower troop choice when building the rest of the deck. The next mistake I see people make all the time is using a Book of Books on a card that isn't a champion or at least a legendary. While the Book of Books does work for any rarity, it is much easier to max out a common card than it is to max out a legendary or a champion, so no matter how tempting it may be sometimes, don't waste your books on commons and rare cards. Just keep requesting and opening chests and you'll max out those cards in no time. Next we have making a purchase in any Supercell game without entering a creator code first. I myself don't have a creator code of my own yet, at least not as of recording this video. I will go ahead and plug it in the description when I do, but any of you watching this are bound to know of another Supercell content creator whose code you could enter. Entering a code before a purchase is free to you, but it does allow the creator whose code you enter to get a very small percentage of the revenue for that purchase. So next time you're going to buy the pass Royale, a shop offer, or anything in between, make sure and take the extra 5 seconds to enter a creator code and show some love to your favorite creator. Many people's first instinct when they see a bandit coming towards their tower is to surround it with skeletons right when it crosses the bridge, since this can be a viable strategy to counter many different cards in the game. You don't actually want to do this with the bandit though, as she will take out the skeletons quickly and then still end up dashing on your tower, doing a lot of damage in the process. Instead, try placing your skeletons right in front of your princess tower so that the bandit wastes the dash on one of the skeletons and then ends up too close to your tower to dash onto it after cleaning up the Larrys. Trust me on this one, you'll thank me later. The next mistake a lot of players make is placing their freeze spell too early. Especially when pairing the freeze with a popular win condition like the balloon or graveyard, people often like to place the freeze spell almost immediately as their win condition is close to the tower or on the tower. Well, you might be surprised to know that this isn't actually the best way to do it. Usually it's actually better to hover over the tower and surrounding area with your freeze spell, since 9 times out of 10 your opponent will end up playing something to counter your balloon or graveyard, at which point you can place the freeze in a spot that freezes both the tower and the defensive card, allowing you to do much more damage and potentially even take the tower. Next we have ignoring the knockback on the Fireball and Giant Snowball. The Fireball and Giant Snowball are two strong spells in the game that can provide a lot of value if played in the right scenario. But did you know that a ton of players actually miss out on some extra value here by ignoring the knockback on these cards? A very common example I see all the time is when people have a balloon coming in towards their tower, they tend to Fireball directly on top of the balloon, or even worse, right behind the balloon. Hitting the balloon head on will do almost nothing in terms of knockback, but hitting it from behind will actually knock the balloon closer to your tower. What you want to do instead is place the fireball so that it hits the front of the balloon or even the corner of the balloon so that it pushes it backwards and potentially towards the center if you're trying to pull the balloon last minute with a building. The same concept applies to other troops as well, whether you're using the fireball or the snowball. Just make sure you memorize which troops actually take knockback from those cards. Speaking of pulling troops to the middle using buildings, another mistake I've seen more often than you'd think is when players try to use a hidden Tesla to counter an incoming Royal Ghost. Now don't get me wrong, this can be done, but you can't just go about it all willy-nilly. If you want to use the Tesla to defend a Royal Ghost, you should place the Tesla very close to the Royal Ghost instead of in the center. This is because the Tesla starts in an upright position when it's placed, so the Ghost will actually be able to hit the Tesla once before it can go underground, therefore revealing itself and continuing to attack the Tesla. If you place the Tesla in the middle though, the Ghost will simply ignore it and go straight for your Princess Tower. Next we have buying the global tournament reward chest for 500 gems when you got less than 10 wins. If you really stop to look at the paid rewards for performing well in the global tournaments, the rewards for 9 wins or less are sort of underwhelming, at least for 500 gems. When you reach 10 wins however, you unlock the legendary King's chest as a reward, which usually costs 2,500 gems in the shop or the equivalent of $25 to buy it on its own. This means that when you buy the rewards with 10 wins or more, you end up getting that chest for 1/5 of the price, 500 gems in comparison to 2,500, and all of the other rewards are just icing on the cake. For this reason, I wouldn't recommend buying the rewards from the global tournament if you got less than 10 wins, since it just isn't worth the gems. Card masteries are a mechanic in the game that is often overlooked by many players. This is unfortunate though, since masteries can be pretty easy to complete with a few simple strategies and can provide hundreds of gems, thousands of gold, and even a good amount of the card itself or wild cards of the same rarity. If you want to get your masteries done a bit more quickly, I would recommend looking out for any challenges on the far right tab in the game that have more elixir in them, such as double, triple, or even infinite elixir challenges. These challenges do count towards masteries, and you can simply spam all the cards that you want to work towards masteries for down on the map and make a ton of progress towards these masteries and, more importantly, the rewards they unlock. The next mistake is making your deck too expensive, and let me explain why. Having an expensive deck hasn't necessarily always been a bad thing in Clash Royale, but ever since the introduction of evolutions to the game, you want to make sure you're keeping your deck cheap by switching in more low-cost alternatives into your deck. This is because you need a faster cycle to get back to your evolutions more often during matches, increasing the chance that you'll win games. Now, I'm not saying to go ahead and delete your deck and just use all spirits so that your deck is ultra cheap, but maybe just switch out a couple of cards in your favorite decks for cheaper alternatives to help speed up that cycle. This next mistake has probably lost you a lot of time over the years. As obvious as it sounds, many players don't know that you can actually hold down on that donate button in your clan's chat to donate as many troops as you're allowed to a given player. This is much quicker than just tapping on the button over and over, and Supercell even allows you to use multiple fingers, so you can hold down one finger on each donation button on your screen to nearly instantly fill up all the requests at once. Using this tip is a great way to save a little bit of time and help out your clanmates even more efficiently. The next mistake is not using the edge of the tornado's radius when using the card. For those who don't know, the tornado pulls harder and faster on cards that are further from its center when the spell goes off. This is why people are able to time their tornado perfectly to drag a Hog Rider all the way from the edge of the Princess Tower to their King Tower. Obviously the center of the tornado is where the cards end up being pulled towards, but next time you're using a tornado, be sure to place it just right so that the Hog Rider or whatever else is coming your way ends up getting pulled as far away as possible. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and ringing that notification bell so that you never miss another upload. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.